Welcome to Hudson's Architectural Heritage. This slideshow originally created in 1984 with a land grant from the National Park Service, Department of Interior, and the State Historical Society of Wisconsin, has been converted to video for easy access and viewing. We hope you enjoy it. Take a few minutes to stroll around your community sometime and think about the buildings you see. Many of our life's activities take place in these buildings. We eat, sleep, and live with our families in a house, a duplex, an apartment, or a condominium. Many of us work in an office of some sort. We are educated in schools. We worship in church and administer the laws of our society in the county courthouse. We obtain food and other necessities from supermarkets and other stores. It is not surprising then that the appearance of these buildings can tell us a great deal about ourselves and about those who lived here before us. Architectural style is what determines a building's appearance. Taken collectively, styles give entire communities or individual neighborhoods their particular identity or flavor. By looking at the various styles and designs that have been used in Hudson over the years, we can discover much about the city's history. Architectural styles are always changing, so knowing when they were popular can help us to learn when specific buildings were constructed. Styles are important in another sense because they do not evolve by accident. They reflect important ideals, beliefs, and priorities for each generation. Architectural design also can tell us something about the lifestyles of families who built particular houses. Let's take one feature as an example. The large porch or veranda that we can see on many of the older homes in town. The amount of decorative trim might tell us how wealthy the builder was. The large size probably indicates that porches were often used by families who spent a lot of time together during the hot summer months. Porches located in front of a house, in view of the street and sidewalk pedestrians, suggest something about how neighbors socialized years ago. Contrast this with the porch shown here that was built by a later generation seeking privacy rather than company. With the help of a grant from the National Park Service, Department of the Interior, and the State Historical Society of Wisconsin, we have been able to survey Hudson and collect information on interesting styles that we find in the community. So let's stroll around and see what these buildings can tell us about Hudson's rich heritage. Due to the limited scope of this survey, we will look primarily at historical styles or those no longer being built. You may wonder why we don't see any of the log homes that most of the early settlers built. There are several reasons for this. When they first arrived in the St. Croix Valley, those pioneers were primarily concerned with putting a roof over their heads, and so their first dwellings were generally small and simple. The major advantages of these log cabins were that they were sturdy, easily constructed, and above all, warm. Once a house had been built, the settlers could go about the business of clearing land for cultivation or pursuing a trade as a blacksmith or a merchant. After their immediate needs had been met, there was more time. The settlers and his family could begin making plans to construct a more suitable dwelling. In some cases, they accomplished this by adding on to the old building or at least covering it over with more finished looking clapboard siding. The few houses that did survive from this earliest era of settlement, such as the 1849 Paschal Aldrich House at 14 Front Street or 16 First Street, generally have been so extensively remodeled that it is not possible to tell much about how they first appeared. More often, those first immigrant families chose to build a completely new home, one that would be more than a simple shelter, one that might remind them of the civilized world they had left behind, but at the same time, one that would symbolize the beginning of their new life on the Wisconsin frontier. We should start our search for recognizable architectural styles with one of Hudson's most interesting examples. Also, one of the oldest homes in the city, constructed by John S. Moffett, a wealthy New York immigrant in 1855, the Octagon House at 1004 3rd Street is an excellent example of how quickly some of the latest architecture styles were transplanted from older, more established parts of the country to the frontier. Back east, the octagonal style was very popular between 1850 and 1860, and Moffat must have seen and admired the innovative new concept in house design. Most historians agree it was Orson Fowler's book, A Home for All, published in 1853, that was responsible for the brief popularity of octagon dwellings. Fowler's design was more than a house plan, it was a philosophy of life. Octagon houses commonly featured a large veranda that circled the exterior of the home, as well as a cupola at the center of the low-pitched roof. The design made excellent use of natural light with windows on each of the 8 sides. Moffat probably reasoned that it was natural for a man to use a daring new design because frontier life itself was a daring new adventure. He spared no expense to make his new home on the outskirts of the tiny village of Hudson a showpiece. The finished residence features a bracketed roof with pilasters at the 8 corners and tasteful segmental arch windows around the cupola. Many of these special features would be copied by other builders in later years, but the octagon style itself was only a passing fad, and it gave way to other designs. A more common example, Greek Revival, was just ending a long period of popularity as Hudson was going through a rapid period of growth in the late 1850s and early 1860s, and it was featured in many of the community's finest homes from that era. It is generally agreed that Greek Revival became popular because Americans so greatly admired the ideals of ancient Greece and democracy. Probably the best example of this style is the Darlene O'Brien House at 617 3rd Street, constructed in 1857 for Frederick L. Darling, who, like Moffat, was a recent New York immigrant. The home was built by Amma Andrews, who, along with his brother Amsa, designed and put up many of Hudson's early Greek Revival dwellings. The Darlings' residence was their first effort. It shows all the classic features of Greek Revival design. The low gable roof forms the full pediment supported by 4 columns. The narrow clapboard siding is trimmed with pilasters at each corner of the home. Tall, narrow windows blend in a regular pattern with the front door, and each window is capped with a sheet lintel. The same elements of style, although not so spectacular, can be seen in a number of other Hudson homes. The Slater House, located at 327 Locust Street, is a good example. More modest, but clearly with the same regard for design as seen in the roof, in the use of pillars and pilasters, and in the arrangement of the windows and door. The abundance of Greek Revival style in Hudson makes it possible for us to see another important factor to remember when we look at architecture. That is the inevitability of change. The home shown here at 1409 3rd Street has had several additions and alterations that have changed the simple original form of the Greek Revival design. The house shown here on 802 8th Street is at the process of being modernized with more energy-efficient windows in 1984 that do not reflect the symmetry of the original design. The front porch has already been removed, and the bay window on the side is also certainly a later addition to the home. And finally, alteration sometimes comes because of a change in the purpose of a building. The Vine Street florist at 527 Vine Street made extensive alterations in the first floor windows and the front entrance in order to adapt the building for commercial use. During the latter half of the 19th century, another new style became very popular in the United States. Thought to be the result of an increased interest in medieval Europe and the romantic stories of knights and dragons and damsels in distress, Gothic Revival imitated the castles and cathedrals that Americans had seen only in novels and history books. The Boyd T. Williams House at 101 3rd Street in Hudson is the best local example of Gothic Revival style. The home was constructed sometime prior to the outbreak of the Civil War by Charles Lewis as a wedding present for his wife. It is said that the home was designed as a replica of a Washington Irving home on the Hudson River in New York State. Note the steep gabled roof that contrasts sharply with the gentle slope of the Greek Revival style. The windows also appear much different, with elaborately decorated pointed arches, and the eaves are decorated with intricately carved verge board trim. The overall appearance is much different from the relatively simple Greek Revival style. And since much of the inspiration for Gothic Revival construction came from medieval cathedrals, it is only natural that churches would make use of this particular style. The St. Paul Episcopal Church, located at 900 4th Street, just across from the courthouse, was constructed in 1882 to 1883, and it shows the same steep roof line and window design that we saw in the Williams home. The church also shows one additional feature that was popular during the Gothic Revival, the vertical board batten siding, which emphasizes the steep lines of the building's design. Another style popular at the same time as Gothic Revival, although considerably different in appearance, is known as Italianate. In some respects, as with the arrangement of the door and the windows, it looks similar to Greek Revival, but a closer look will show many differences. The William Dwelly House, located at 1004 4th Street, is a well-preserved example of Italianate construction. Dwelly, a native of the state of Maine, had immigrated to Hudson in 1884. He was an explorer, lumberman, and surveyor. Typical features of his home, constructed shortly after the Civil War, included a low-sloping hip roof, ornately carved brackets under the eaves, a large porch supported by thin posts, and tall, narrow windows. Another good example is the John C. Spooner residence at 915 3rd Street. Constructed in 1877, the house is especially interesting because it shows elements of several different styles, something an architectural historian would call a vernacular interpretation. Italianate features include the bracketed roof and the round arch detail over the front door and the second-story windows. Perhaps the varying styles used in the home's construction symbolize Spooner's own varied career. Born in Indiana in 1843, he fought in the Civil War, practiced as an attorney, was elected to the state legislature and Board of Regents, and eventually became a general solicitor for the Omaha Railroad, and later served in the United States Senate. A popular variation of the Italianate style was known as the Italian villa, shown here in the David Fulton House at 904 6th Street, and constructed around 1885. After Fulton returned from a distinguished Civil War career. The villa style features the same bracketed roof as the Italianate, but it was more commonly L or T-shaped rather than square, and the building is dominated by a prominent square tower. The Italianate style is also evident, although more modest, in the Samuel Merritt House, located at 904 7th and constructed in 1862. And also in the William Hatch residence at 803 3rd Street, constructed around 1870. As the 19th century progressed, popular architectural style became progressively more ornate. By the time the William H. Phipps home was constructed in 1884, the Victorian picturesque styles were the latest rage. Actually, the term Victorian refers to several different but closely related styles, including Queen Anne, Eastern Stick, East Lake, and Victorian Gothic. The Phipps home at 1005 3rd Street shows many examples of Queen Anne style, including a large irregular shape, a recessed porch on the second floor, and a corner tower. Also typical of the Queen Anne style was extensive use of very elaborately carved wooden panels, octagon shingles, posts and tailings such as those shown in this detailed view of the front entrance and the second-story porch. The same detail is clear in the tower, which features an 8-sided turret with a tent roof, octagonal siding, and more carved wooden panels. Of course, not all examples were as elaborate as the Phipps mansion. The Samuel Johnson residence at 405 Locust Street was constructed in 1882 by one of Hudson's pioneer physicians and shows many of the same details, although not so elaborate as the Phipps home. The house's outstanding feature is the large veranda that commonly encircled homes constructed in the Queen Anne style. Still another example of this very popular design, but even more modest in scope, is the home located at 112 North Street. This house has undergone many changes over the years, and there is very little of the original detail remaining, although one can see a pedimented gable roof and carved millwork at the peak. Probably more than any of the other styles, the Queen Anne was expensive to build and difficult to maintain. Before too many years, a more simple series of styles began to become increasingly popular. Among these were several new revivals, including English, French, Spanish, and colonial revival shown here in the residence at 209 Orange Street. Colonial revival architecture is generally characterized by more simple decoration than which was common in the Victorian styles. The lines of the homes are cleaner and the overall impression distinctly less cluttered. A hip roof with dormers was often included as well as a chamfered bay window with brackets. Several of the features were reminiscent of past styles. The larger veranda was retained, but with less ornamentation than in the Queen Anne style. The prominent columns remind one of the Greek Revival, although they were elegantly tapered, but again, styles changed. And shortly after the beginning of the 20th century, the bungalow became a popular home for the average working family. Not so expensive to build as the elaborate Queen Anne style, the bungalow included many features that made it both comfortable and affordable. There are numerous examples in Hudson, including the Haywood House located at 800 Vine Street. Constructed in 1922, there is some ornamentation such as tapered porch posts and the stylized eave supports, but these details are more functional than decorative. The bungalow makes more extensive use of windows than previous styles did, and the plans commonly included an enclosed porch in the front of the home. This bungalow, located at 605 Wisconsin Street North in North Hudson, shows many of the same details and some of the additional features common to the bungalow style, including exposed rafters, a tie beam resting on the porch posts, and a shed door on the second floor. As we walk around Hudson, we can see how these different styles blend together and create distinctive neighborhoods, some with an old and stately look, and others with a more new, younger appearance. But we should not stop after just looking at the residential neighborhoods. The business district has undergone developments as striking as those we have just seen in the Hudson's homes. We might think of the business district as another neighborhood, it just serves a different purpose. Commercial buildings have always been clustered in one area near the river because the St. Croix River was the first highway leading to Hudson. It brought new immigrants to develop lands and new goods to stock the shops along 2nd Street. The river also provided the means to export crops, lumber, and other commodities. Like the residential neighborhoods, the business district has undergone many changes over the years. Unlike the houses, we do not see any wooden buildings, but in this case, there is a simple explanation. A disastrous fire in 1866 destroyed almost all of them, and knowing the danger that resulted when a large number of wooden structures were built so closely to one another, most merchants began to construct brick or stone buildings rather than using lumber in designing new places of business. Merchants obviously had intentions most different from those they had in building homes. But still, the commercial blocks show us a fascinating variety of ornamentation as builders labored to make Hudson an attractive community to prospective settlers and entrepreneurs. One of the first modern brick commercial buildings was the T.E. Williams block at 321 2nd Street. Home of the T.O. Plastics Company, it was constructed very shortly after the Great Fire. Over the years, it has been used as a hardware store, county office building, a jail, a garage, and an auto parts business. It featured many of the architectural elements that were common on most 19th century commercial buildings. The second-story windows were arched and decorated with stone hoods. We also can see what is known as architectural terms as arcading arches, or a series of rounded arches supported by columns. Another architectural highlight of the downtown district is the Taylor Ghost Block at 501 to 503 2nd Street. Constructed in 1880 and today in 1984, the home for the copycat printers. Note the decorative use of brick and pressed metal, especially the iron cornice with brackets. The E. E. Gatchell building at the corner of 2nd and Locust, constructed around 1895, shows many of the same architectural features. The elaborate cornice with the name of the building's owner was common on many stores of that period. Notice that the single arched window on the second floor with the stained glass as an added decorative touch. The entrance to the building is also largely unchanged from the original. It is recessed from the front of the store and flanked on either side by display windows, an important new development in the 19th century. We can also see the detailed ironwork that was used to decorate the facade of the building. Frank Harding constructed this building at 520 2nd Street in 1866, immediately after the Great Fire. Today it is the home of Harding's at Hudson. The building is a modest example of Italianate commercial style, showing again the recessed front entrance flanked by display windows, segmental arch windows with brick hoods and sills and what is known as corbelled cornice, or one that is supported by bracket-like brick detail. Of course, there are many other buildings in the downtown district that are done in similar styles. Some show very elaborate detail, others do not, but most important, although they are similar, each building has some distinct detail that sets it apart from the others. We can see another important example of commercial architecture in the old Omaha car shops created in North Hudson, with construction beginning in 1891. The shops were the major community industry for decades. The buildings are largely functional and designed with rows of segmental windows and extensive use of skylights for good working light and ventilation. The doors are exceptionally large for easy access and for moving cars in and out. Inside and outside of the buildings, there is almost no architectural ornamentation other than the modest cruciform brickwork cornice shown here. So the next time you walk around Hudson or drive downtown, take a closer look at the buildings you see. Remember that the historical architectural style can tell you a lot about the community and how it has developed over the years, but also remember to look at the new buildings as well as the older ones. If it's as we said, this style symbolizes America's great love for democracy, what do you think future generations will say about us based on this home? Or this one? Or this one? Thank you for watching our show. We hope you enjoyed learning about Hudson's architectural history.